All right, welcome back. Tonight we will have now two talks from, you already know, Wout and Amy. So I won't say much. I will just hand over to whoever wants to start. Who wants to start, actually? Amy, you're already here. All right, you can just have fun.
Thank you. Is this on? Do I need to do anything? Okay, cool. Hi, so yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Looking forward to giving this talk about generative art. It's quite hard to know kind of what the knowledge level about generative art is in the room, but I think it's quite a varied talk, so hopefully you'll find something interesting sort of no matter what your knowledge level is. So yeah, I mean, Jeff touched on this earlier as well, but just to start off with some definitions. And I think my approach to definitions in general is to keep them quite open. Like, I don't like to be restrictive, and I'm not interested in being in the business of ruling on what is or isn't generative art. Like, I don't find that to be a very interesting question, same as, you know, the question of what is or isn't art in general. I think it's a lot more interesting to talk about, is this good art? Is it interesting art? Is it good generative art? Do I find something interesting in it? But I think it is useful to create some kind of definitions just to have something to sort of frame the discussion. So first of all, we often think of generative art as being something that's created with a computer. And I think it's almost synonymous, I think, in a lot of people's minds that like generative art is computer art, but that's often true, but it's really not always the case. And it's definitely not the one defining feature. So it's also sometimes not created like a computer, created by a computer. We can create art by defining rules for ourselves and carrying them out on paper. So the definition that I like to go with is that it's art created using autonomous processes. And then that kind of immediately begs the question, what's an autonomous process? And I would say it's one which is not under direct human control. And specifically, it's outside the artist's control. So sometimes we might introduce other humans to be part of that randomness, but the artist is relinquishing some control. And to talk about that in a bit more detail, I think those sort of autonomous processes often end up using randomness, systems of rules, and natural systems. And I mean, this piece that's running now uses all three of those. And randomness is probably like the mainstay of generative art. Like it's used all throughout generative art. But rules are huge as well. And I've included natural systems. And I think but like it can work in both ways, that a natural system can be a generative artwork, and it's also often a inspiration for generative artists. So yeah, just to define kind of the difference between short form and long form. So these are terms that I think were coined by Tyler Hobbs in an article that he wrote, I think maybe a year or so ago. So short form generative art is often kind of individual pieces, like it can still be a series, but each individual piece is chosen by the artist in advance. And we have a process of sort of perfecting each of those outputs individually. And certainly for me, that's often like a really iterative process where I'll be hitting F5 until I find one output that speaks to me, and then stay with that output and adjust the variables until I get it exactly how I want it. And that's what happened with this piece. Whereas with long form, it's always a collection of pieces, and the final outputs are often only seen at the time of purchase, as we see on like FX Hash and art blocks. And there's a real process of perfecting the whole collection, and it's a really different way of working. Like, we're working in a huge space where every change you make, you have to think. Like, I'm looking at one output and thinking, oh well, I wish that one had fewer lines. But if I remove the number of, like, if I lower the number of lines, how is that going to look in the other 400 possible outputs? Okay, so yeah, let's talk about randomness and variables. So in this piece, which I coded just as an example, all of these images were made using the same program, but there's a number of kind of settings and variables that define the differences in each one. So each piece is made by laying out lots of nodes on the canvas, and then joining those nodes to their nearest neighbors. And then in all of these different outputs, we can see kind of the differences that are happening there. Like some of them only have a few nodes, like the top left and the middle at the bottom here, and some have lots of nodes. And then there's also the differences of the number of connections per node, the palette, and then the actual placement of each node. And all of those variables, we could define them in the code just by writing in the numbers, or we could create like a user interface with sliders and manually drag those sliders up and down. But those would be very human controlled, non-autonomous processes. And I mean, for a lot of that, it would be really tedious to kind of define all those things in code. But with generative art, we can create a system where those decisions are made generatively, and then we can produce, you know, hundreds or thousands of outputs. So these are works by Vera Molnar, who's an early generative artist, and she used a mechanical plotter to produce a lot of her work. And in interruptions on the left here, each of the lines is rotated and then at a random angle, and then some of them are missing at random. And she said that her peers were scandalized when she made artwork like this because they felt that she dehumanized art. But she was using randomness as a tool for exploration. And she said that while the computer was an efficient tool, randomness let in a bit of air, a grain of madness. And I really like that. It's like she's using it as a way to bring something outside of herself into the work and open up the space that she's thinking in, find new inspirations. And then she talks about opening it up and then narrowing it down, like finding the wide space of things that could possibly be interesting, and then finding what interests her and honing in on that, and then honing in further and kind of using the randomness and the generativity as a tool to do that. So how do we actually generate randomness? Something that's really important in a technical and I think in a conceptual sense is that it's not actually randomness at all most of the time in generative art. It's pseudo randomness. So generally computers don't have a mechanism by which to produce a random number. I mean, they do exist, but like laptops that we own generally don't. So what we use is a pseudo random number generator. And that works by taking an initial value known as a seed and running it through an algorithm to produce a result. And that's often the timestamp on the computer. So at 7:45, we might get this number, and 7:46, we get this number, 7:47, we get this number. And each time we run the code, we'll get a different result. So I've got an example of that here. So this code is just, it's running a loop that runs 30 times. It generates an X position and a Y position each time, and then draws a circle there. And every time I run it, it will produce circles in different places. But if I add in this line of code here, oh, I don't know. There we go. Sorry. Okay. I'll go through this again. Yeah, so it's just a loop that runs 30 times. And every time through the loop, it generates an X position and a Y position, and then draws a circle at that position. And sorry, I'm on the wrong screen again. And then every time I run the code, you can see it produces those circles in different places. But if I add in this line and define the seed for the randomness, instead of using the timestamp from the computer, it's just using the number 10. And now every time I press play and run the code, it's producing exactly the same result. So to me, that's a really important conceptual difference. And isn't that one? Sorry. It's not my laptop, it's hard to. Sorry, I've lost the notes here. That's the right thing, but this is not the right thing. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so conceptual difference basically between actual randomness and something like a random number generator is actually deterministic. It produces the same result over and over again. And that's what happens on sites like Artblocks and FXHash, where we use the transaction hash to produce randomness. And true random number generators do exist for purposes like banking and security. And they use things like radioactive decay or atmospheric noise readings to generate genuine random numbers, which are completely unpredictable. And and it's something you could theoretically do with a wall of lava lamps with a camera at them, because the movement of the lava in the lamp is so unpredictable that we could use it to generate random numbers. And that's something that I'm really keen to try out is, well, I've been experimenting with it already, is using things other than pseudo-random number generators to produce outputs. So a bit of a philosophical sidebar about whether anything is really random. So according to Newtonian physics, all motion is theoretically predictable. So if we know all of the relevant facts about a situation, so like the mass of the objects involved and the velocity and so on, then we can predict the outcome of that situation. But in practical terms, that's often impossible, like in chaotic systems, because tiny inaccuracies in measurements will multiply out and cause large errors in predictions. But theoretically, classical physics tells us that everything is predictable. So if the same seed goes in, the same result comes out, the universe is deterministic. But quantum physics tells a different story, and that's one of a universe that is probabilistic. So quantum particles seem to behave in ways which are genuinely completely random, and we don't, there's no underlying variables that we're aware of that are causing those random movements. So the implication is that at an atomic level, there is genuine randomness happening. And yeah, again, I think it's an interesting conceptual point and something that I'm looking to explore more in my work. So coming back to kind of our standard pseudo-random number generators, something that's really fun to play with and really useful in generative art is distribution. So this is a technique that I use a lot. So each of these squares is playing with distribution in a different way. So at the one in the top left is a standard distribution, where dots are being generated completely randomly on the y-axis in all of them, and then on the x-axis the distribution is different. So the top left one is standard, and then you can see they're kind of weighted to the left or weighted to the outer edges or weighted to the middle, and that's a really useful tool in generative art. So again, just the piece that I coded as an example, this is about 30,000 rectangles overlaid each other with a low opacity, and this is with a standard distribution. And then this is with the distribution of them weighted towards the bottom. So straight away you can see how there's something more dynamic about the second image, and it's something that we can use to play with a lot. There's also Perlin noise, another way to play with a kind of randomness. So in a random number generator, when we put in a seed, we get a completely diverse range of numbers out. But with a Perlin noise, if we put in the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we might get 5, 6, 7, 6, 7. So the numbers are related to each other. So there's only small changes between each result. And this is an example of how we can play with that, just with the positions on the y-axis. So the left one is completely random and the right one is using Perlin noise. And then on a 2D canvas, again, the left one is completely random and the right one is using Perlin noise. And we start to get these things that we call flow fields, which are frequently used in generative art. Probably most famously in this work by Tyler Hobbs. So this is Fidenza. The image on the left is from a blog article that he wrote about the piece. So that's kind of showing the underlying flow fields that underpins Fidenza pieces. And then the image on the right is one of the Fidenzas. So this is a piece of mine called Tangle, which also uses a similar flow field to kind of distort the position of this grid, which would otherwise be a completely solid grid of triangles. So in this one, I think you can quite clearly see how the flow field has been used to create that distortion. And then this is another piece of mine called Skyscapes, which uses a lot of Perlin noise, but it's not quite so obvious where it's placed in the piece, but it's essentially everywhere. Like every element, like the placement of the stars, the shapes of the clouds, the distribution of the branches on the trees are all controlled by Perlin noise. And I think it's super interesting to me how naturalistic a piece you can create like this. It's completely created from code. It will run in a browser. And and the purlin noise creates such a natural look, and it makes me wonder, and it makes me curious about how many algorithms are kind of underlying the natural world that we live in. Yeah, using rules is kind of another huge part of generative art. So the classic example for rule-based generative art is Solar Wit. So this piece, wall drawing for the Boston Museum, I'll read it out. It says, on a wall surface, any continuous stretch of wall, using a hard pencil, place 50 points at random. The points should be evenly distributed over the area of the wall. All of the points should be connected by straight lines. And with this piece and many others that Solar Wit created just like it, the artwork was the instructions, and then it was created or implemented in lots of different ways. The idea was that it would be implemented by draftspeople in various galleries, but it's been used in lots of different ways since then. So there's 3 examples here. The one on the left is one that I coded up as an example. The middle one is an interactive version you can use online where you click and it creates all of the connecting lines. And then the one on the right is it being done in a gallery by a draftsman. And I think it's really interesting to note like the scope for interpretation with rules like this. Like they sound really simple, the rules, like draw these dots, connect them together with lines, but actually there's a huge scope for interpretation. So for example, the fact that it says all of the points should be connected by straight lines, there's a lot of ways to interpret that. So like the one in the middle, every dot is connected to every other dot, but the one on the right, each dot, they're just connected in pairs. And neither of those is breaking the rule, I don't think, but they've each chosen to interpret it in a different way. And that's, I think, at the start I mentioned the autonomy of the artist. You can give up some autonomy to other humans, and that's still like a generative process, I think. And this piece, which I absolutely love this piece, it's kind of taking that idea to its conclusion, I think. It's called Red Follows Yellow, Follows Blue, Follows Red, by Studio Monica. And each of the groups of people, they have headphones on. And so the blue group and the red group and the yellow group are all getting different instructions through the headphones. And they're instructions like, follow the yellow people, or like stay away from the red people, or get away from everyone who's wearing the same color as you. And there's a huge, again, scope for interpretation in the rules. This is, yeah, it's just a really short clip, but I encourage you to go and look it up. The whole thing's about 20 minutes long, and it's really interesting to see like the points where, I mean, you don't hear the instructions as well, but you can kind of tell what they've been told to do. And then there's like one person will wander off in the wrong direction, or, you know, their jacket falls off, or they move in a slightly different way to everyone else. And it's unavoidable, that sort of human input into it. Yeah, I think it's nice. Yeah, then kind of right at the other end of the rules spectrum is this piece by Casey Rios. So each of these contains 3 sets of overlaid lines in red, green, and blue. And the whole piece is called RGB3. And then each of the titles contains 3 angles, which describes the angles that the lines are at. So the red angles and the blue angles and the green angles. And then some of the lines, areas of lines are skipped at random as well. So again, that's a really simple set of rules, like draw 3 sets of lines and angle them. But it creates these really interesting overlays. I think there's actually a lot of detail in the images, which I think is perhaps not coming through on the screen there, but yeah, have a look at it. So yeah, then coming on to natural processes. So a classic example for this is this piece called Condensation Cube by Hans Hacker. And this is a complete departure from art created by code. It's literally the entire piece is a perspex box where condensation is forming inside, and it's left to run on its own and create the condensation. And you can look at the patterns that are being formed inside the box. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring that up as a classic example of generativity that is outside of the computer. And this one as well, magical contamination. this artist uses Petri dishes of microorganisms, and they actually vary the outputs by controlling conditions like the oxygen levels, the amount of light, and the temperature, and that influences the way that the mold grows. So it's a completely different but very similar way of how we think about using variables to create our work as coders. They're kind of using those controls to influence the outputs. So this is something that I've been working on, just a work in progress, where I'm creating a flow field on the left, but using a photograph as the input on the right. And I have this one as well with a video where, yeah, like I think I've mentioned that I'm looking to find ways to create and generate work that uses inputs other than a pseudo random number generator. And I think, yeah, like I say, it's very work in progress because I'm cautious about creating something that's a representation of an image. And I think there's a balance to be found there about keeping it as an input and not essentially like filtering an image into an output. So yeah, exploration happening at the moment, but conceptually, I think something interesting should come out of that. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about how I see generative art as collaborating with the computer. And how there's how the process works for me, basically. So sometimes, I'm basically going to talk through one project that I made, I think about 2 years ago. And so for the original idea was that I was just going to create a circle of points, and then each of those points was going to be connected to the one opposite by a curved line. And I imagined it being quite bold, geometric, graphical, like solid lines. That was the plan. So I started out setting up my nodes and joining them over. And this image on the right is just to show like kind of the control points for the curve. So thinking about how curved they need to be. I think when I first imagined it, I imagined that's where the control points would need to be. But immediately I could see that those lines were nowhere near curved enough for what I wanted. So I had to move the control points much further away. So this image on the right here, I've zoomed out so you can see actually how far away the control points needed to be. And I mean, that's just a small point, but straight away it's like if I was creating work on paper and I had a sort of an error in my thinking like that, it would be a huge amount of work to start over. But with code, you're like immediately and quickly iterating with everything that you're doing, which I find a really enjoyable process. So yeah, I kind of got to this point, and yeah, like I said, I was planning to do really thick, bold graphical lines, but when I saw this, it looks so like wispy and ethereal. I decided to push it that way instead. So I massively increased the number of lines that are there and lowered the opacity to create these like really ethereal pieces. And then I added in color to create these. And I think, yeah, the point I'm trying to make is that the idea that I originally had was so different from where I ended up. And I think that's the thing that really appeals to me about making art with code, is that it's such an iterative process, and you can create something and then see the result, and then off the back of that result, create something else and collaborate with the computer towards the results. And then, yeah, I was able to animate them as well. So yeah, this was a series of pieces called Twists, which I released on Hicket Nunk back in the day when that was a thing. I think it's a loop, so I think it's going to go forever. That's it. Thank you. Is there time for questions? Or I don't know how long I spoke for.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
I wanted to go back to letting in a breath of air.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the first time I've ever quoted Elizabeth Gilbert at a conference. She talks about the ancient Greek concept of genius, which is so different from the romantic idea of the artist as the tortured genius, and is much more about the idea that you collaborate with the spirit of a genius that comes in and works alongside the artist. So my question was going to be, does it feel like a collaboration? And then 2/3 of the way through, you use that word. And I guess that makes my second question, how does the collaboration feel? Because what she is talking about, and I think what a lot of people, when they collaborate, what I feel like when I collaborate, is that there's a freedom involved. You surrender yourself to the unexpected. There's another mind, in my case, a human. In your case, there's a computer involved. So is that liberating? What does it do to your feelings about your artistic process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. It's a really interesting question. I think it starts to feel like a discovery. Like sometimes I feel like I'm finding the art instead of making the art. Like I try something out and then it's like, oh, it did that. Like it's a surprise, and it's an uncovering more than it is a creating sometimes. So sometimes it's very much like I want this thing and I create it. But yeah, those moments of discovery and uncovering, I think. And I have collaborated with other people as well, and it's only worked for me in very few situations, which I think probably says more about me and my affinity to computers more than people than anything. But I wonder if there's that feeling with people as well, like if you can discover something together with another person that obviously that you wouldn't have discovered on your own. I'm sure that happens, and it definitely happens with the computer for sure. Thank you.
Yes, maybe it will be interesting to have a conversation like the two of you as well, because you work with your partner together, and you said like you have this dialogue between you are working more on the digital side and your partner's more like physical. But what I actually wanted to ask was about the performative aspect, because like I'm not a coder. I know some basics, but like I think the process is very similar to performance art, because you kind of are with Solid and everything what you explained there. You kind of write a script and then you hand that over to another agent or to just something else that is kind of executing that. And I was wondering, like maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, because in our emails you were also mentioning you did some more interactive things, just out of curiosity.
I think there's definitely like a relinquishing of control that happens. Certainly as well with kind of the long form generative art, where you create a system and then you have to know that all of the possible outcomes for that system are going to be good, or that you're going to be happy with them. So there's certainly a relinquishing of control in that way. But yeah, something I've done it more in my older work, in my interactive work and my installations. So I made an installation. It was a tunnel and it was filled with LEDs, and it had a touch screen that people could come in, and it had a few different things. You could have star fields going past, you could control the stars, or you could draw on the screen and it would draw on the lights in real time. That's a huge amount of control to give over to people. And I took it to festivals, and I remember being like, this could be bad, like you don't know what people are going to draw. And then I built it at Nowhere Festival, and it was, it's like out in the desert, it's hot, it's a nightmare. And the first thing that someone came in and drew on the screen was a heart, and I was like, oh, it's okay, everything's going to be fine. Like the world is not a cold, dead place, So yeah, I don't know. I think it's terrifying giving up that control. And I think, there's in some works as well where things have been interactive, I've had to be, I've put limits in to what people can do to kind of ensure that they can't do anything that I don't want to be part of the work, and sometimes that does limit it. But in giving over the control and seeing what people do and the kind of things that people come up with, like people were playing games with the system, like they were drawing things on the screen and having people guess what they were by looking at the lights, and that I wouldn't have thought of it, like the kind of stuff, or they were drawing in time to the music that was playing and so on. So once you do give over that control and see what people create in response, like that's one of my favorite things about making art.
But it's interesting that you say, that you say you rather collaborate with your computer, but you still like to see what the audience is doing with your work after you kind of reached a point when you say, okay, now I am ready to hand it over.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, it's like therapy, but I think it's, yeah, I like to have control over the system, and to a certain point, and I like to be able to make the exact decisions about what control I'm going to give over, and then say, here you go. Whereas I find collaborating from the beginning with a person, it's a completely different thing, I think, for me. Yeah.
Do we have other questions? Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So my background is computer science, and I just thought I would make few observations what I just thought while listening to you. So number one, I have also tried to study randomness for years, so I really enjoyed your comments on that, and I was just curious, number one, that whether you have also thought the opposite, to I would say to test out different orderings. So there's randomness and order is on the other side. So have you tried to encode order some way or somehow?
I mean, yeah, I think there is often order in the work. Like I'm trying to think of this. I mean, even in this one, I think so. This one is built in a similar way to a piece I showed at the start, where it's nodes and then they're connected together, and then the kind of flowy sort of lines are built off that. But the way the nodes are laid out is in a grid in this one, and then the grid is distorted. So there is a certain, and in some of the in some of the outputs, the grid is completely ordered. So there is, yeah, there's certainly an element of order in there in the layout. And I mean, all the way through the code as well, there's going to be choices that are made, and some things are given over to the algorithm, and some things are, I want it to be like this all of the time. And I think that balance is really interesting. And something that I often try and do in the work is give as much control to the algorithm as possible, because I want to see all kinds of variety and I want to see lots of different outputs. But the more control you give over sometimes, then also the more possibility you're allowing for outputs that you don't want. So kind of finding that balance is tough, a skill, I guess.
And my second observation is actually linked to what you just said, because again, in computer science, we often teach that programs are explicitly executing our orders, and what you're saying is that you're interacting, you give out some control. So philosophically, you could even maybe say that you are like you're not giving out control, but you're like encoding your own imperfections or how to say, things that you don't know yet. So I think I found that also really, even philosophically, really, really curious. But thanks. That was just my comment.
Thanks.
One anecdote, and then kind of connecting to your points. The anecdote being when you were talking about Perlin noise, and it's kind of how the nature has Perlin noise. This has always been interesting for me, because the history of Perlin noise, it was made in the process of making the movie Tron, and it was like purely aesthetic algorithm. And so in the 80s, developed to look like nature, like to create, but really no scientific, only aesthetic evaluation. And it's interesting to see how common it has become, like, and how how much it is used in the development of naturality. Like Minecraft is essentially different applications of Perlin noise, Perlin worms, and things like this. But then connecting to this conversation is that I was interested, do you have the concept of stochastics in this field? Because I used to, when I was in games more on the video game side, one of my annoyances was that there was randomness, and then there was like order or rules. But most of the time when people said randomness, they actually meant stochastics. Because if they had like, okay, this can be 3 or 5 or 7, and then the next part can be 9 or 5 or any number between 1 and 9, that's stochastics. That's designed by kind of creating branching pathways and arrays. And why I think it's for me kind of important to separate that. It also kind of points out, like, because randomness really means this, like you well presented, this sort of sense of like the sense of the ultimate random, whereas stochastic means branching design. And many of the examples from the earlier cases, for example, in art blocks, were almost purely stochastic design. So is there a presence of this kind of separation between randomness and stochastics? Because for some reason, games really didn't have that.
I don't know what stochastic means. Sorry.
It means precisely that.
Like, is it about the making choices from a predefined set of options, or is it about randomness that's actually deterministic?
It's essentially
Like
designing an array where you don't have a control of the choice, but the choice is made by something else, like a computer. So, like, if you would have an algorithm, like in the earlier cases, okay, it could have a grid of 3 or 5 or 7, but you have said that it's 3 or 5 or 7. That's stochastics.
Okay. So like a predefined number of options.
Yeah.
Yeah, and choosing from those
Yeah.
options. Yeah. Okay.
And then creating chains of options leading to options. That's like stochastic design.
Sure.
Which I'm kind of interested why it hasn't entered, because I think it's useful to have the separation between randomness and stochastics because they're ultimately different.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna Google the word afterwards, but I think
Yeah, you find it.
yeah, definitely the thing about providing a set of options rather than opening up complete randomness, that's absolutely something that I do in my work. Like, I have a function where I provide an array and choose one item from that array rather than saying a number between this and this. And then I also have one where I can weight the probability of choosing each of the items from the array, so I can, weight the distribution, much like I do with the functions. And then I think the branching happens kind of naturally as a result of that, because I will often say, well, let's say I want, you can have 10 nodes, or you can have 100 nodes, or you can have 500 nodes. And in the case that there are 10 nodes, then we're going to need more of the outer lines to make sure that the image has enough going on. So I think those kind of decisions do end up being made, and the kind of if statement path through the program, definitely falls out of in that way. Yeah, I'm interested to look it up.
Yeah, but there's an interesting variety for which maybe it would be useful to have even more concepts, just to kind of point out what is the kind of variety working with this variation that is not under one's control. I think it's an area that we could maybe understand better.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can, in case there are no other questions at this point, we just can have a smooth transition to you and then open up afterwards.
Hands on desktop, right? No, desktop, I think.
Computer white desktop. That was, give you a thumb drive. I knew that was going to come back to bite me. Yeah, we restarted it and deleted all the files on the desktop, and I have no idea why.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. The overall theme of this talk will be about decentralized art installations. It's something I've been researching lately. And art installations have already interested me for quite a while, as I've talked about before. I prepared this talk not knowing that the panel would reveal so many personal stories already. So I'm probably going to skip some of those and rush through them. But the slides will still appear. So I'll just quickly introduce who I am and who my partner is, which my partner Mick, I've been working with for like 20 years now. And together we formed the artist collective Reductive. And we explore at the moment a lot of interaction between physical art and digital art. Mick actually studied audiovisual media at University in Utrecht and then got his master's in semiotics at the University of Portsmouth. Sorry, yeah. Got this thing here, yeah. So in October, we're going to launch a completely new website with all the generative artworks, which we will obviously post on Twitter. I'll give a bit of a background where we're coming from. We met in 2001 and we started actually kind of directly an multidisciplinary artist design agency. And we did all kinds of projects from web development to exhibition design. And we had quite a few big clients. And in 2008, we had like 4 people working for us, and we had a few interns coming and going all the time. And we decided it wasn't a life for us because we were more managing people than creating things. So we decided to literally sell everything we got, and with 2 laptops and 2 dogs started traveling the world as digital nomads, which forced us in a kind of different way of working because we had to do everything digitally. So I focused myself on web development primarily, which teached me a lot. And Mick started working on photography and video clips for television stations or private clients. Then fast forward to 2015. We found that we didn't had a lot of evolution in our work because it was always clients' work and we were traveling. So it was kind of, again, in this kind of slug situation where we had to do the same thing over and over every day. So we decided we landed in Barcelona at the time. We decided to open our own art gallery to showcase our work and to hopefully sell it. And surprisingly, this went very well. We ran it for like a year and we sold about 300 artworks during this period. But the best thing about it was that we literally directly connected to people. People would come in, ask us questions about the art, which gave us a lot of self-confidence. And from that moment on, we decided we would dedicate our lives to becoming artists full time. Then this is a bit to show you an image of the gallery. It was like an open space, and in the back we had our studio where we were working. So it was really a combination of the two. And the best thing about it was that we were our own boss. There was another gallerist telling us what to do, which type of work to make. We could really follow our own feelings and desires. Then in 2021, we discovered NFTs. and we got really excited about it and immediately jumped on the train. So we made an art collection of NFTs called Woology, which was released on Foundation on the Ethereum blockchain. And we sold a few of them, but I always felt something was missing because we were simply applying the same principle we were doing in our gallery, like producing an artwork and with a certificate and giving to the buyer. And I felt something more should be done with the technology, like a blockchain, because it allows for so much bigger concepts. So that's what when I started looking into generative art. I'm sorry. Actually, it was after seeing a presentation called Generative Machines by Matt Delorier that I realized that I've been doing generative art for quite some time. My graduation project I mentioned before, the poetry floor, was an interactive installation. It was, I don't have any images of it, so I'm sorry if I disappoint you, but we'll have to use our imagination. Cameras back then were horrible, and I lost some pictures in archives. It was like Persian rug with 49 tiles below it, and there was a camera observing the movements of the person walking or jumping or playing on the rug. And there was in the background a matrix printer was hung on the wall with 600 meters of paper running through it. And I collaborated with this for this installation with Han van der Vecht, who is a Dutch writer and poet. And he wrote a poem in 3 different layers, where the bottom layer were kind and nice and soft words. They were also spoken softly. There were also 2 speakers next to the installation. So if a person moved over the rug, the words were spoken and the words were printed in real time by a matrix printer. And I use the matrix printer because a matrix printer can print 1 character at a time, as opposed to another printer who parses a whole page and then prints out the whole page. You can literally program a matrix printer to print character per character, and which fitted in perfectly with this art installation. After that, Mick and I did quite a few other smaller installations, all involving a matrix printer or a camera or tiles on the floor. But then it kind of, we forgot about it in work, and that's where Matt reminded me that I should pick up this this work. I'm sorry. I'm going to skip these things. That's what I'm in the search for something new other than just selling media files on the blockchain. I started exploring blockchain native art with, and the first encounter I had with this kind of concept was a project by Alexander Watanabe called Unsigned Algorithms, which had quite an interesting take. It's something I hadn't heard before and probably was going on in the background for quite a while, but it stored the entire piece, the entire artwork on chain. So what that means is a lot of people imagine that on-chain NFTs are actually executed on-chain. This was just the storage, but I think that's the most interesting part, because that makes it possible to create a project online that will never disappear. for as long as the blockchain is alive, without any external dependencies. And it got me thinking that on-chain NFTs and interactive installations got me thinking about putting those two together, because I think a blockchain is inherently a collaborative effort. Without collaboration, there isn't decentralization, and without decentralization, a blockchain is just a really complicated database, and it wouldn't make much sense. So I think for an artwork, for us to make an artwork, it would have to have some kind of collaborative effort where every buyer would be a participant, and every participant would and all participants together would collectively shape the projects and steer the project in a certain direction. So the result of this research is dendrorhythms. Dendrorhythms is the word dendrorhythms is a portmanteau from dendrochronology and algorithms. And dendrochronology is the study of dating tree rings to the exact year. And I actually based the idea for this work on a work I made in a piece I made in 2020 when COVID started. That seems to be a time where a lot of people started going into generative art. And this is also a generative art piece which I drew by hand. So before I started to work on this piece, I set out a number of rules, which was putting down a number of dots. Around those dots, create circles in different sizes. And then around every circle, every core, draw rings, one core at a time, until the whole space is filled up. And to me personally, this piece has a much deeper meaning. I don't like to talk about my art, about the deeper meaning of my art, but I think it's very appropriate in this scenario, in this context. It actually represents people in a room, and how every person takes up has an aura, and how some people take up a much larger space in the room than others. And it's something I personally struggle with sometimes when I'm in bigger crowds, how the aura of people can affect the way I behave myself. And I try to replicate the same algorithm I did for this piece in 2020 in code. I hadn't actually done such a thing before. This was all very new to me, despite me having a lot of coding, a large coding background, because I've been in coding for at least 20 years. But I hadn't done anything creative with it, really. So the algorithm, the interactive installation would work like this. The first NFT minted would have a core. The buyer could then choose to add a core, and when adding a core, this same core would be carried forward into the second mint, and the buyer of the second mint would be able to add a core, or again not add a core. But the cores themselves, they evolved. So they had a lifetime of a random lifetime between 15 and 20 mints, and every mint the core would age. That way, the pieces wouldn't be too crowded, and during the mint, the cores they came and went. So this is an example of a series of mints, and you see the first one has one core, the second one has two cores because there is already a line, and you see the cores evolving over time. So they grew and then they got smaller again. I'm going to skip the on-chain thing because we spoke about that already. Another thing that I found interesting or also kind of annoying is the rarity aspect that you see a lot in the NFT space. Many PFP projects try to generate a number of pieces, and then some of those pieces have a random feature, which makes them a lot more rare than others. And I thought, why not just turn this concept upside down and have the community or the buyers or the participants choose the rarity or define the rarity themselves? I'll quickly go to the interactive minting process we created. In order to make this project, we had to write the whole application ourselves. So there was not really any platform where we could have buyers decide something that would then be minted on the blockchain, and then the mint after that would use the same data from the previous mint in order to generate the next one. So in all current platforms, you have a random factor, but the random factor is only for that NFT at that moment. So what buyers could do was they could choose a color. We decided to have 6 different colors in the beginning, and every color would be a chain in itself. So every color chain would evolve in a different way based on the choices the buyers made. And then after the 6 weeks, we introduced a weekly color where people could mint this color only this week. And the whole project ran for about 3 months in total. So the second step was, do you want to add a core or don't you want to add a core? I wanted to keep this whole process very, very simple because the concept is already very complicated. So these should be yes or no questions. So people wouldn't be wouldn't get stuck within in the process. So yeah, this is a quick overview of the Dendrorhythms project. I would welcome any questions if you have one.
Thank you very much, first of all.
Hi. This might sound trivial for an artist, but again, for a computer scientist, it's really interesting. But could you just describe maybe in 30 seconds what was the process of driving customers to your physical gallery to get those 300? So basically, how does it work for an artist to drive them over there? And secondly, how did it look like for an NFT?
Well, the gallery that we had was in 2016, and it was really an experiment. We didn't set out a marketing plan or anything. We just found a very good spot where we opened the gallery that we could run. We could renovate with not too much investment, and from then on we opened the gallery, and what I think drove the most sales was the fact that we were working there in the space and people could see us working. And at some point, we even moved our office or our working units in the middle of the gallery. So we would be surrounded by art on the walls and we would be working in the middle. And people naturally started talking to us, and that opened up a lot of interesting conversations and also friendships. And that's how a lot of people got convinced that they wanted to buy something.
Was it different for NFTs?
For NFTs, let me tell you, the marketing aspect was a nightmare for me personally. I really don't like being on social media. I don't like running communities on Discord, and these things were really, at a given point, I was almost having a breakdown because I had to deal with so many people and so many questions and so many, well, people who are used to being in these communities, and they expect things, and they ask things like, if I buy an NFT now, will I get some benefits in the future, and all these kind of things I didn't really thought about, and I feel that also don't have a place in art or in an art world as I know it. Probably it's shaping up to be something completely different, but that was a completely different story.
One more really fast question. Sorry. Yeah. So, if you allow people to add the course, did you tell them that they would add, people with aura, or?
No. As an exception, I tell you this, but because it makes sense within the concept of the whole project, because it's about a collaborative effort and how many people's choices affect the whole piece. But I didn't tell them in advance. No.
Thank you.
Thank you. I actually have a follow-up question regarding the community. I already had that during your talk. Maybe both of you can respond, up to you. I was wondering, you were mentioning during your talk, you see how entire communities are forming around an art project. And I was wondering, like, how do these communities behave? Like, how long do they actually last? For example, after a mint or after the mint is over, do they still stick together? What is the dynamic of this kind of community, or people forming this kind of group, and then maybe will they stay? How do they behave? Maybe we had enough time after 1 or 2 years to.
Our project was finished in May, 15 May, we stopped. And after that, I saw a massive drop in active people on the Discord, and a lot of people just disappeared from Discord. And now there's like 1/3 of the people that actually were in there is left. So I think the communities are not really that strong. They are strong at the moment of minting, or perhaps maybe if you as an artist run the Discord as an artist and not as the project. But I see a lot of Discords around NFT projects being centric on that NFT project and not about the bigger picture. It's always about a very specific thing.
And I think I would just add, I'll just speak kind of from the Art Blocks standpoint. So we have this added knock-on effect that we have over 300 projects on our platform. And so there's sharing of communities across projects. So a single project will have, however many mints worth of people in community, but then we have this multiplier effect across however many projects are on our platform, and we're all engaged in the same space. And so, yeah, so we have it's just kind of an ongoing, community building and adding. And so where we might lose people, we add people on new projects and that sort of thing. So that's what I'd say about that.
This is really interesting to hear because, I'm like totally into researching the NFT community and hearing from you that it dropped. Do you think it's because your involvement was not as much, because you said you didn't like it, right? Being in Discord and everything. Do you think that's why the people left, or was it?
Yeah. It probably has to do with the fact that I'm also not constantly maintaining or entertaining the Discord there. So for next projects, we'll probably have to look into a different approach, or hire people, or collaborate with some people that could maintain those spaces.
And follow-up question is, why did you decide on a project Discord rather than like a Discord for your art in general, like having it like a general?
Basically because I started looking around and I saw all projects have like Discord servers, and that's probably the way it's done in this space, because we were very new to it. So we hadn't been buying NFTs from other artists, and it's basically just copied from other sources. But we really have to think about how to create a better platform for it, because Discord servers are also unmaintainable at a given point as an end user. I mean, at a given point, I was in like 100 Discord servers and I got constant messages and I was just unable to keep up with everything. And probably it's not always the best to have this kind of stress in your life as well. So if you know a better solution, I'm all ears.
So it feels like there's been lots of growth from like point to point. So I'm really curious to know where you're going next, actually. I know that's a fairly simple question, but the logic of your kind of progression and the way that you describe the narrative through moving from this project to this project to this project makes me wonder where you're looking next, if you're willing to talk about that. If that's something.
Oh, yes. Where we're looking next? We're exploring, as Reductive, we're exploring the collaboration between physical art and digital art. So how can we make the computer, integrate the computer in our physical workflow by, for example, that Mick would create something that is a basis for an algorithm, and the algorithm, I write the algorithm, and the algorithm drives Mick to make other things. And that's what we're exploring right now, and making much smaller collections, because Dendrorhythms, for example, was quite a big project for us as a small team. And we had like 900 mints, and building the whole infrastructure and running our own node and running our own web server and building the app. It was quite a lot, you know. We worked like 4 months just to launch this single project, which should be more efficient. But the tools weren't just there for us. But that's what we're focusing on, is making like 10 smaller NFT projects or blockchain art projects in collaboration with the physical pieces. And aside from that, I'm also involved in a few other projects with other people I can't really talk about right now, and I really want to, but and there is one other installation that we're also planning to do, which is kind of a follow-up of Dendrorhythms, and it's called the Decentralized Sculpture. Where a lot of where all the participants, all the buyers would also shape the project, but they would get an NFT that is a part of a sculpture, and then the sculpture would be printed in live in 3D at every mint. We'd send the file to a 3D printer, have it 3D printed, and then build the sculpture in real time, and people could follow it in real time online. So that's kind of an idea we're working on to launch by the end of the year or beginning of next year.
Are there? Yes, there are.
Yes, so thank you very much. It seems to me that you're in the art books that you presented, you're very interested in this relation also between the physical space and, let's call it, the on-chain art. Are you like, how would you address the problem of the relation between these two spaces, and how can this become a kind of research in itself, so to speak, as a problem, how to bridge the gap between these two spaces that are like constantly thematized by.
Yeah, I think we spoke about it for a short while in the panel. How to make the relation between the physical piece and the digital piece, and would you then sell the piece as a whole, so that if, for example, the owner of the NFT also has the physical piece, and when he sells the NFT, he should send off the physical piece as well, which is what we did with Dendrorhythms. So we had like 13 pieces were selected from the 893 mints, would be created as a physical piece, and the certificate was embedded in the NFT, in the metadata of the NFT. But it's definitely something we're researching, how can we maintain this relationship, and should there be a relation between the NFT and the piece, or should they be always separate? But I think in, for example, the decentralized sculpture, there you have like a one-on-one relation between the NFT the person gets and the part of the sculpture that's actually generated. So this is, I can't really concretely give you an answer to your question, but it's something we're really exploring.
Thank you.
Anything else? Otherwise, I suggest we can close it here. The exhibition is still open. Please have a look. We will have it also the next 2 days. It will be there. Talk to the artists, talk to the people around you, and otherwise, see you tomorrow morning with a talk from Ruth. Thank you.
Thank you.